We're going to jump right back into the program for this conversation among our Gladys Black Women of Distinction honorees. So for those of you who don't know, this award is named in memory of the fund's late friend and committed board member, Gladys Black. Gladys was a business leader, and after the death of her husband, she became acting president of the Valley Forge Group, which comprised of companies in the US, Germany, and England. She was an active and engaged supporter of her church, her alma mater, and a number of organizations and nonprofits. It's really the same commitment and drive to empower women that Gladys had that led us to recognizing each of the honorees that you'll have a chance to hear from today. So with no further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Patricia Miller, an operations executive and board director, Roberta Torian, a financial services counsel and principal at Seneca Global Strategies, Dr. Laurie Bernotsky, executive vice president and provost at Rochester University, Charmaine Spence Rochester, the chief financial officer and senior VP at Chester County Hospital, and Tiffany Scott, who will be our moderator. Tiffany is a board member of the fund, as well as the director of college counseling at the Church Farm School. Again, you can refer to the handout that went through the chat to learn more about these ladies. So Tiffany, I will turn it over to you.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Michelle. I am really honored to be amongst these really accomplished women in Chester County. They have done so much for our community and for the places that they represent. So I'm really glad that we get to have this conversation with them. I hope that all of you had a wonderful time in your breakout rooms. I know in our breakout room, we learned so much from one another. And I know it's kind of challenging in these Zoom times to build those connections, but it's definitely a great opportunity for us to gather in this way this Friday morning. So for my panelists, I will start with Patty first, and I hope that all of you will be able to chime in on this question. So each of you obviously are leaders in your workplace and exemplify great leadership in helping to pave the way for other women in the workforce. So you guys are all pretty ambitious already and have had to juggle so much in your career. What inspires you to look out for others when you're balancing so much in your own career?
I guess that's me, right? Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, and to the fund for including me in this wonderful summit. This morning has been great so far, and I hope we can continue that. I have to say first that I am very envious of anyone that works for the companies or for these ladies that were on the panel this morning. I think some of us would be in a much higher position if we got to start like that with companies like those. They are making a difference. What inspires me? It's quite simple. I don't want anyone to experience the same barriers that I did in my career. Starting working in the late 60s, things were very different and we wouldn't be even having these conversations. If I can coach, mentor, hire, recruit, develop, and provide opportunities for others, then these are great satisfiers for me. It makes me feel good.
Roberta?
I guess two things for me. And I also say thank you for including me on the panel. I guess that was Michelle's decision, so thank you very much. And thank you to the women this morning who were amazing and very magnanimous in responding to some tough questions, I thought. So kudos to you. So one of the things is that I got out of law school in the late 70s. And so my career spans a time when a lot of people on this call were not born, 1978. And what I was able to achieve, I guess, because sort of one-offs, like some person there would help or some person elsewhere, may have known someone. What I've tried to do is to help other women in a consistent way, so that it's easier for them to navigate. It's easier for them to find someone that they can get ideas from or share their ambitions with, talk about the road up with, really just to try to make it easier for them. Because for me, it was haphazard and an awful lot of luck, and nobody can count on luck.
Dr. Bernotsky?
Sure. So, you know, I've been really fortunate, and listening to Roberta and Patty, I especially want to recognize that because of the work that I do and being in education and higher education, you know, I've got the opportunity, right, to interface with students, men and women, and faculty and administrators, and in an environment that I think is more open to equity and to inclusion. And, you know, certainly from a very young age, I've had a really strong passion for social justice. And I've been really lucky in my life to be able to be in spaces where I can pursue that, right? So what motivates me, and when I was faculty, by the way, for 15 years before I started in administration, all at Rochester, did some adjuncting work at some other institutions. But, you know, I'm very motivated by the attempt to change the world, right? Even if it's just my little corner of it. And when I was faculty, you know, I taught race, class, and gender theory for a long time. You know, I would think about changing the world, you know, one classroom at a time. And now I think about it as, you know, one institution at a time. And for any of us, right, as you move up in leadership, one organization at a time. And it is amazing, right, when you kind of look back. So that motivates me, and I've thoroughly been able to pursue that, fortunately, in my career path.
Charmaine?
So I just want to echo my appreciation for the program so far today. It certainly has been inspiring listening to the speakers, and it's such a privilege to be here. And I think it's, you know, I have a similar reason for wanting to be a difference maker. And I think it's because others have been difference makers for me. I'm an immigrant. I came here with my mom, who is a nurse, and she had to rely on others. And I think as immigrants, you don't know the rules, and you're trying to figure it out. And were it not for, you know, the help of folks, and sometimes you didn't have help, and you did what you thought was best, and you learn as you went along. But I just think the more we know and the more opportunities that open up to us, we have a responsibility to make sure that we provide that for those who need us to be the difference makers for them.
So Charmaine, you kind of led right into my next question that I have. Is there a particular story or a person that fueled your motivation to help to fuel how you look out for others in your positions?
Yeah, so I mentioned my mom a little bit. You know, because of her sacrifice and the risks that she took, because she wanted to create a better life for us, she created a legacy that I think inspires me with everything I do. And as a mom of girls who are now adult girls, it's interesting that my mom inspired me, and now my daughters are inspiring me, because you know, they saw I was always a working mom, and you know, we heard stories earlier how tough it is when you have bosses who don't understand, and the sacrifices, and you feel like you're a terrible mom and you're a terrible employee because you're juggling both worlds and you're never doing it great. And I'm on the other end of that now. My girls are grown, but I can tell you, when I was going through it, I was also a military wife. So my husband was out. I was a single mom a lot of the time. He was in the Navy, so he'd be off on the ship. And we'd be in a town where I didn't know anybody, so I didn't have a support group. And I was working. I was always a working mom. And I can't tell you, there's so many days where I just felt like I was not a great mom, and I wasn't doing all I could at work, and I was just caught in this world. I had a lot of guilt both ways. And I really hope that if there are young moms listening now, they'll take heart in knowing that really what you're doing is you're showing your kids how to build resilience, because I think that's what they saw. You survive. It's not pretty all the time, but you get past those difficult times. And now my daughters are inspiring me because they've both decided to serve in the military. They both went to the United States Air Force Academy, and they chose routes that were traditionally male dominated, and there are no accommodations made because they're a woman, and they've gone in there and they've held their own. And so when I think about what they're doing, it inspires me to continue moving forward. And I just want to mention that I recently transitioned. So I was at Chester County Hospital as a CFO for a long time. Well, not that long, around 4 years. And I recently had the opportunity to move to Lancaster General, still within the Penn Medicine family, as a CFO here. And I can honestly say that my mom and my girls, they inspire me to keep, reaching for that next thing, and taking risks and doing the hard thing, because when you do that, you really are creating a pathway for others who can follow.
That's awesome. Thank you for being so open with your answer. Roberta, do you have a comment, a story, or a person that fueled your motivation?
I don't have any hesitation to say that the person who fueled my motivation was my dad. I had a wonderful mother, loved her to death. We were very, very close. But my father, who was an independent businessman, he worked with American Express, but he had his own business in selling, securities and insurance to them. So he was an independent businessman. He thought that it was his obligation in his spare time, this is a man with a business and 4 children, to find time to mentor other small businesses. And he worked with the Chamber of Commerce in, well, we grew up in the suburbs, but the nearest sort of city was New Haven, Connecticut. And he worked with the Chamber of Commerce there to set up a small business, sort of an incubator. And he would go there a couple of evenings a week and work with other people who wanted to start small businesses. And he wasn't paid for that. He wasn't selling them securities. He just thought that he had that obligation. And in most cases, not all, in most cases, they were African-American men who were trying to do it. Because again, this is the 60s and 70s, so you didn't have a lot of women at that point trying to start their own businesses. Although I do recall there were at least 1 or 2 women who did come into the incubator that he worked with. So I grew up seeing somebody who took their own time when they didn't have to help other people who were trying to make a better life for themselves. And so to me, that's kind of, what you're supposed to do.
Thank you, Roberta. Dr. Bernotsky?
Yes, sure. Certainly the person that I think about a lot is Madeline Wing Adler. She was the first woman president of Westchester. That was 3 presidents ago, but she was president at Westchester when I got hired. She was here for 14 years. There were people actively working against her, literally because she was a woman, right? And it's think about that and the role that she played and all she was able to do here. She made a tremendous impact on the borough, on the downtown area, certainly on the university and our faculty and staff and students. So, she's bold, she's courageous, she knew who she was. And she took me under her wing very early on in my career. And I absolutely owe a lot to her and am inspired by her in the work I do now with other women.
Patty?
Well, there's lots of stories to tell and people who pushed me, and some of it was negative. I think early on, Lauren talked about the negative part of your life that you learned from. I was told no, I couldn't play the drums, and I became head drummer. I was told no, I couldn't be a lifeguard, and so I became a really good lifeguard. Only saved 1 life, but that person probably makes a difference for them. And then I realized that no motivated me just so I could prove the naysayers wrong. And my parents especially motivated me, which we're hearing that as a common theme. My father was a truck driver and worked very hard at 2 jobs, so I learned how to work hard. My mother worked hard to make our small house a home. She took great pride in it, so I understood that when you do feel good about something, that that's okay. They didn't finish middle school, but they had zero tolerance for me not doing well in school and going to college. I don't know where that came from, but to them, education was everything. And certainly all of my teachers were inspiration throughout school, encouraged and inspired me to read, write, and dream big. And my first career mentor was my motivator. And I know we'll probably be talking about mentors, but I have to put it under motivation because she saw in me what she went through and didn't want me to experience the same things. She came from a poor family. In fact, it was just her mother who was a cleaning lady. And yet this woman went on to Wellesley College on a full scholarship and was one of the first women, one of first 3 to attend Harvard Business School. She had challenging jobs in a world of men, and she paid the price for it. She smoked 3 packs of Marlboros a day. And yet she unselfishly never wanted me to experience all the challenges that she faced. And she believed I could do more than I thought I could. And I did, thanks to her.
Wow, these were really some inspiring stories. And I thank you all for just being so open in your responses. I just wanted to let our guests know if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to use the chat function. We want this to be as interactive as possible, and we'll try to make sure we either get to your questions as we're going through the stories, or we'll get to them at the end at our Q&A. So feel free to use that function. So for our next question, what are some of the things that you accomplished to help women in their path forward that you are most proud of? And we'll start with Patty.
Okay, I just muted myself. Well, for my first job as a manager, all the way through to I ended up as president of Nobel Learning Communities. I've always focused on diversity. I never called it that, and actively hired and developed women who have gone on to be accomplished professionals in so many different fields and are positively impacting others. I also encourage them to be very actively involved in community service. This was something that my parents did, even though we didn't have any money. They felt that they needed to help the poor older people. And I wanted to make sure that that just became part of the individuals that I was focused on as part of their DNA. I also worked hard to improve employee compensation and benefits. Equal pay was not a given, but I could certainly impact that if I were managing people or running an organization. But I remember one company didn't cover birth control or OBGYN visits. And I overheard this in the restroom. We all know that scene from 9 to 5 where the supervisor's got her feet up and she's in one of the stalls and she's listening, but she was reporting back negative things. But what I would hear is people, women, certainly since I was in the women's restroom, being honest about their concerns, and I was in a position to do something about them. One woman said she couldn't afford to see her doctor because it wasn't covered under our benefits, and sick leave was limited to 3 days. I pushed for change and also pushed for educational tuition reimbursement because a lot of the women had not had the opportunity to finish their education or continue their education. And then I even established a scholarship at my alma mater, which I can talk more about later.
Great, thank you, Roberta.
Some of the things that I did. So before I joined the law firm, I started my career as a lawyer within banks, within financial institutions. And so the first one where I led the law department, which was PSFS, I was the first woman and first person of color hired. Everybody in the department was a white male. And 6 months after I got there, I was promoted to head of the department. And we won't even talk about how difficult that was. But the first hire I made was a woman. We didn't, as I said, I was the only one that they had, and I felt that it was important for there to be another woman in the department, who could do really good work. And so that was my very first hire. When I was in-house at another institution at PNC, I had a secretary who was very smart, and she came from a background where her parents couldn't send her to college. And she said, I want to become a lawyer. And I said, well, then you should. And I, pushed her and encouraged her. I helped her get a promotion out of the secretarial group into, a higher level so that she would be eligible for tuition reimbursement. And that worked, and she did go on to law school, and I helped her with recommendations, and now she's a partner in a small firm. And there have been women who were in my firm, and I said this in our breakout session, whom I made sure got work when I had large projects to give to other lawyers, and I would tell the lawyers who were taking my projects for my clients that they would have to include. And there were, a couple of women, one in the Philadelphia office, one in the New York office, that I mandated be included in any projects that were done for my clients. And then there are women that I have mentored for a long, long time who have done wonderful things. And I have to just say one thing, that one woman I've been mentoring since she was a client of mine in New Jersey was just hired to be the chief counsel, the general counsel for the Obama Foundation in Chicago. And I've been mentoring her for almost 10 years. I was one of the people to give her a very lengthy in-person recommendation. So that's probably my most accomplished mentee. But those are three, different ways, 3 or 4 different ways that I've promoted women, hired them and promoted women.
That's awesome. Dr. Bernotsky?
I think formal and informal mentoring is something that I'm really glad I have the opportunity to do. I have mentors myself, and I get to serve as a mentor now. Some of the programs I've been able to establish are certainly related to my role, but then informal mentoring, I think, has also been, a great way to give back, to encourage other women. And the theme around whether it's formal or informal, one of the areas that's meant a lot to me is encouraging women to find their authentic voice, their authentic self when they leave. There's a million books and tons of advice and all the rest of it. But the theme that I talk about all the time with the women I engage with is you be authentic, right? It's whatever the mold is, you can break the mold. It depends. And certainly I know I'm thinking about Patty and Roberta. I think it's easier now. And I think depending where you work, it's easier or harder. In higher ed, it's certainly easier. But there's still a lot of patriarchy, and there's still a lot to overcome. So that I'm proud of. And there's quite a few women who would have never imagined themselves moving beyond where they were. And now they are in really great places and have gone on, et cetera. And certainly I'm not taking credit for those things, but they have let me know, right, that seeing it and some of the ways that Madeline Adler did for me, just imagining, I could do that. And I could do it the way that I feel authentic doing it. It doesn't have to be exactly like somebody else. So I'm happy that I've gotten to give back on that.
Charmaine?
So Tiffany, there are a couple examples that come to mind, and it's interesting because they all stem from things that I wish I had. And then when I had the opportunity to create that for someone else, I took the opportunity. So the first thing that comes to mind is a mentoring program that I developed with my employer when I lived in Virginia. I worked in the accounting department and I wanted to advance. I knew that I could do more than I was doing at the time, but there was no pathway. I had no way of, figuring out what to do. I had a very traditional boss, and he wasn't going anywhere, and he didn't really give any thought to the folks who might want to do something else. So I ended up, taking a different job within the organization, and fortunately eventually became the CFO for the organization. And I created a formal mentoring program, not just for my region, but for the whole or enterprise, which spanned 5 states. And I handpicked folks in the finance because I had the opportunity to meet different folks from the various markets. So I knew who the rising stars were and those who were wanting to do more and maybe, didn't know how to do it. And so I invited them into this mentoring program and then reached out to executives across the 5 states and matched the mentees with the executives so that these mentees would have the opportunity to talk about their aspirations and get advice from folks, because not every leader, not every manager can give that to you. And if you're stuck in a place where the hierarchy is so strict that you can't, have access to other leaders, then you become stuck. And I felt, especially for finance folks, a lot of us tend to be introverts. I'm a raging introvert, and it's just not in my nature to seek out networking and go find people to help me get where I need to go. So I was fortunate to have the support of the CFO for the enterprise in developing this program for the finance team. And before I left, the enterprise took what we were doing in the finance team and made it an enterprise-wide program. But I was very happy to have the privilege and the opportunity to do that. And then more recently at Chester County Hospital, I had the privilege of creating a leadership networking breakfast for African-American women in healthcare. And the inspiration for that was hearing about the experiences of some of the folks who encounter racial situations from patients or in the community, and just feeling a burden to create a safe space for these healthcare workers who give their all. They show up and they're giving everything. They're caregivers, or they're working in nutrition, but they're giving everything for the health and well-being of our community. And I felt like they needed to have a space where they could feel appreciated and talk about their aspirations and inspirations. And so I created this breakfast, and this is pre-COVID. And we would invite 15 or so women, all levels of the organization. They would come to breakfast with me as a CFO, and we just talk about who inspired them, and just thank them for the work that they were doing in the hospital. And it's interesting. I had that program going when things became really tense with the awareness of how far we need to go as a nation towards racial equity and reconciliation. But that program was already in place, and it was just a great space for us to continue the dialogue. And of course, with COVID, we had to stop doing the breakfast, but I'm so glad I had the opportunity to do that, and so grateful for all the women who I met through that program, because they continue to inspire me.
Thank you, Charmaine. I think you also answered the next question, which was the journey of moving an idea to action. So you definitely answered that, and how you saw an issue and you just leave it to where you were. You expanded it across 5 states. And so I'll have my other panelists answer that question. What was your journey of moving an idea to action? And was that action incremental, or was it sweeping action? And I'll have Dr. Bernotsky start.
Sure. So it's contextual, right? I think that there are moments when it's important to do something incremental, and then there are moments when it needs to be sweeping. So I try to use incremental when I'm doing things like this, only because it takes less political capital and you can build buy-in, et cetera. But when there's something egregious or urgent that needs to be done, I've also made sweeping change. So I really think it just depends on the context, and I think that flexibility can just play into the level of buy-in or the cost it's going to take to do something sweeping if you have to sort of force people to comply. And I've had to do both.
Roberta?
Okay. So, and this was in the context of the firm. One of the barriers to women making partner, at least at big firms, is the ability to bring in business. And one of the things that I saw was that, and I think anybody in a big firm sees that. It's why a lot of women either don't make partner or why they leave. So I worked with our head of training, and I think they called it training and education, to start monthly sessions for business development for the women. And we used training materials that our training group developed, but more importantly, we brought in outside coaches so that the women could meet with coaches. And I would go from, I'd do the Philadelphia office, I'd do the Chicago office, the New York office, San Francisco office, the LA office. I'd go around the country to various offices where we would have these sessions. And then once each group was set up, they would meet monthly to work on business development. Sometimes it was role playing. It was just different things. I mean, it's not, I'm not a teacher in that area, but we brought in the experts to do that. And the other thing that I got the firm to do was to give, quote, scholarships, so-called, so that women who wanted to have one-on-one coaching on how to bring in business could pay for it. So the firm would pay for most of it, and the woman would make some contribution so she'd have some skin in the game. But the bulk of the money would be paid by the firm for one-on-one coaching on how to develop business. And I thought that was really critical, because that's a major issue for women, being able to maintain their positions in firms.
Thanks, Roberta. Patty? Patty, you're muted.
There we go. It was stuck. I was so fascinated with what Roberta was saying. I want to be a lawyer now and work for her. I found that what I needed to do as the operations person, I was the driver of the business. But on the other hand, I still needed partners to make differences in equal pay for equal work, as well as the benefits. So I was quick to always partner with the HR person. And fortunately, that was usually a woman, because that was a field that was open to women, right? And then also with my general counsels at the companies I worked at. And fortunately, they were women. So when we had things like inequities throughout the business, both from a hiring standpoint or benefits and compensation, I could get immediate buy-in from them. And then there was power in numbers. There were the three of us going after the others, because sadly, Charmaine, the men were the CFOs and the CEOs. So if I would have had you, we could have moved things along quicker. But that made a difference. And then as far as incremental or sweeping, I would have to say, given the times, that it was incremental. my sense of urgency would want it to be sweeping, but then I would be perceived as a bull in a china shop. So you had to back off and play it, even though you knew you were ultimately going to get it, because if you're passionate about what you believe in and it's the right thing to do, you can make it happen. Sadly, there's still so much more to do. And when we lived through this pandemic, we've seen women lose their jobs, or they're forced to quit due to childcare not being available, which just breaks my heart. Or they got COVID or had to care for others who were sick and didn't have sick leave. And certainly there's still a lot more for us to do, because we can do better than this.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to what Patty said about having folks allies to help you. I didn't accomplish any of that without having allies. And at Chester County, the HR leader, who's a woman, was my ally. And at my other job, the CFO over the system was also a woman, and she was an ally. So, I think it's important to find like-minded folks in the organization who you can, coordinate with to move ahead some of these initiatives that if they can relate to what it is that you're trying to do, it's more likely that they'll help you accomplish what you need to accomplish if you're trying to make sweeping change or incremental change, either way.
Thank you. My next question, as a woman or as a woman of color, with the motivation not only to just succeed for yourself, but to bring others along as well, what have been some of your challenges? What has been your superpower in success? And conversely, what has been perhaps maybe your kryptonite? And I'll start with Dr. Bernotsky.
Let me start with the superpower, because it will relate to the other pieces. I think the superpower for me is forthrightness, honesty, the ability to have the uncomfortable conversation. That comes pretty easy for me now. It didn't always. And it has become, I would say, a critical piece of the way that I lead. The challenges, of course, related to that are around dealing with whether it's organizational lack of transparency or lack of transparency relationally, et cetera. That there's been a lot of challenges that I've had to sort of address over time with that. And at the end of the day, that's been the thing that has really made a difference for me, is finding my own, again, being authentically myself and being comfortable with engaging in those sorts of forthright and honest conversations. I think the kryptonite related to that, and it might sound odd, but the kryptonite for me is compassion. And that is, at the end of the day, you're dealing with people and humans, and they have lives and families and their own concerns. And I am a deeply empathetic person, and my empathy and my compassion sometimes makes it hard. You know what the right decision is, but then doing it, right? When you think about the people that inevitably, sometimes it's not going to be what they want, and it might put them in a situation that you wouldn't want to see them in. But as a leader, you have to do the things that you have to do. So compassion and empathy are good qualities, but they can be the thing that make me sort of at risk of losing my resolve around the things that I know I need to do when I lead.
Thank you. Charmaine, would you like to answer?
Yeah, so being in the finance field, I think one of the challenges I've had is just I don't automatically get the I want to say respect or recognition for whatever my position is, no matter where I am in the organization, and especially as a CFO, because a Black female CFO is a bit of a unicorn. You don't see that often. And, I've had experiences where I walk into a meeting with someone on my staff who happens to be a white male, and folks assume that that's who the CFO is because they know the CFO is coming to the meeting. They've never met the CFO. And so I have to be careful to not see myself in a lesser light just because others don't automatically recognize what, the value I bring to the table. So I have to, there's one voice in your head that's always telling you, you're not worthy, you're not as good. And you have to drown that out with the other voice that says, you know what, I'm not perfect, but I'm working hard. I can do this and I absolutely deserve to be here. And it's that constant making sure that the voice that gives you the courage to keep going is louder than the voices that are there that are telling you that you don't deserve to be there. So I was listening to, I recently started listening to podcasts. So that's my new COVID thing. I listen to podcasts, and I was listening to a podcast, and they talked about the word perspicacious, and I'd never heard that word before. But as they talked about perspicaciousness, which is this ability to step back and see the big picture and connect dots that are not necessarily, intuitive to other folks, and being very perceptive and discerning. And I really like the word because I think throughout my time since coming to the States as a teenager and, getting to where I am now, I think I've developed that. I don't know if it's a superpower. I think it's a gift in process, but I really like the word. And I think it's one of those talents that I think I want to keep working on, but I definitely think it's helped me get to where I am today.
Thank you, Patty.
Try this again. It worked this time. Well, early on in my career, I am very comfortable admitting at this point in time, it wasn't back then, that I would get very emotional about any injustice that I experienced. And there were lots of them. There were numerous times that I was paid a lot less than male colleagues who had the same job. And many times they had a better title than I did. I experienced a lot of discriminatory actions in jobs that I was interviewing with. The questions that were asked, I won't even repeat there because hopefully they don't ever happen again. And sometimes I even cried about it. It was just like, okay, this is what I got to deal with. But it took me a long time to channel that emotion into constructive actions. I realized I needed to confront the issues. Of course, it helped to have a position of power to do that. So when I got that, I was certainly more aggressive about it by asking questions, listening and learning, and then speaking up with solutions. So if I couldn't do anything about the issues, then I just knew it was time to move on because I need to believe in myself and I need to surround myself with people that believe in me. Others tell me that my superpower is motivating people, but I would say my superpower is being a problem solver. And that's how I've ended up where I am, that I don't see anything as a big problem. I just try and instantly figure out a solution. And of course, that can be the kryptonite too, because it's full steam ahead on solving that problem. I think maybe the two work together, motivating and problem solving, because you can't do it by yourself. You want to motivate people to help you pursue that, but they have to believe in ultimately what it is that we're working together on. And if I believe in a solution, I believe I can help make it happen. That doesn't always mean that I've been successful by any stretch of the imagination, but I do face every problem believing that I can solve it. And then if I fail, I focus on what I've learned from the failure.
Thank you, Roberta. You're muted, Roberta.
Challenges and superpowers. So And I think part of what we're supposed to be honest here, and this would happen just when I have to go off of mute, right? And it's a spam call, so I can't pick it up. It's like in Allentown, Pennsylvania or something, no name. Sorry. In any event, so in being completely honest, and I found the fund supports us in doing that. I have to say that when you're a lawyer, I mean, I passed the bar at age 25. When you're a lawyer, you have in certain settings automatic credibility. So in some settings, you don't have to prove yourself as much. You still have to prove yourself for your job. But if you're in a corporate setting, it's less so. So my challenge initially was just feeling that I could do the job, sort of like Charmaine was saying. And my first general counsel was a woman, and my legs used to literally shake every time she walked into my office. You would have thought I was in the Arctic in a bathing suit. I was just like petrified every time she walked into my office, but I learned so much from her. I was there. It was after I left that job that I went on to become a general counsel myself. And so that's only a challenge, definitely when you're starting out. When I was made a general counsel in that group, where I was the first person of color hired, and then made everybody's boss in 6 months. That was one heck of a challenge. And I'll talk about that later as a mentor, but finding whether I could manage was huge, because lawyers don't manage. Lawyers solve problems. We don't, have the kind of people skills that other administrators, maybe Patty has in running Nobel Learning and so on. So that was also a huge challenge. But, with the right support, you get through it. In terms of superpower, I would say on the good side, the superpower I have in working with so many mentees, and I do have a lot, and I've had most of them for, at least 6 years and some for 15, that I'm still very close to, is that I care. I really, really care. I really care about your career. I really care about prepping you for your interview. I really care about making sure you negotiate the best package when you're going to the next place, and I'll teach you how to do that, and I'll teach you how to ask. So I think on the mentoring side, my superpower is really, really caring about every woman that I've worked with and continue to work with. On the other side, I think my superpower is being a little ruthless. And in the world that I come from, it's not unusual, and sometimes it's necessary. So in getting somebody moved up so that she could be eligible for tuition reimbursement, that wasn't a walk in the park. I had to go and talk to somebody and twist their arm to do that. In my firm, getting my partners to include these women that I identified on projects that I gave them wasn't something they gladly did and said, oh yeah, great, send me anybody, send me any woman you want, I'll be happy to do it. No, that's not how it works. Because in addition to the hours, in addition to doing a good product, in a big firm, you have something called profitability, which means that you have to be able to do the work at your rate and still make money for the firm. And that is a very delicate balance. And there are a lot of metrics around that Charmaine might well understand, but there are a lot of metrics around profitability. So I would really have to be pretty ruthless and say, either you do it my way or there's somebody down the hall. And I will say I had to do that. There were times when I would get in a slew of litigation matters for a client. I might get 15 at once. And it was a package for a single client. And I would say to so-and-so, I'd like you to handle this. I don't do litigation, it's my client, but you got to have Tiffany on the matter. Well, I've already got Joe and he's my, my best guy. And I'd say, you know, I think so-and-so do a better job, and I would just take it away. I just wouldn't give it to them. And in the long run, some of them would be coming into my office because my book was one of the biggest in the firm globally. So I couldn't be, I know someone was saying she was compassionate, and I think that's exactly right in certain situations. If I had been compassionate, I wouldn't have gotten any work for any of those women at my firm, because the guys would have said, yeah, I am the best one to handle that, you know, that deal, but I've got to have my own guys for blah, blah, blah reasons. If I had said, okay, I understand, you want to be comfortable with the people you work with, but I didn't. I'd said, you know, I'm taking it away. So my superpower was being ruthless in support of the women that I was trying to promote. It may not sound pretty, but that's candid.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing all of those stories. I think it's so important, especially as we have women on this call, on this Zoom, who are in many different phases of their careers, just hearing these words of wisdom and knowing that that path may not always be a straight path or an easy path, but still a viable path to take in support of others and to stand up for something, I think is a wonderful takeaway from this conversation. My next question was going to be around mentors and allyship, but I think many of you talked about the mentors in your life and how you have been allies to women in your organization. So I will bring it to another question. And this question, not all of the next set of questions, these are not questions that everyone needs to answer. So feel free to chime in when you have a comment or response. So we know that so much has changed over the last year in regards to COVID, exposing and deepening the economic challenges of women, especially women of color, and they have faced that for many years. What are your takeaways on this? What advice would you give a colleague who is eager to take action in some way but doesn't know how to get started? Or what advice would you give a female colleague who is feeling overwhelmed juggling the many demands of her life right now?
All right, Tiffany, I'm going to jump in on this one since I didn't see anyone else go off mute. So it's a big question. So I'm going to share what comes to mind. So regarding the question of what advice do you have for someone who wants to make a difference but doesn't know how? And what comes to mind for me is a Starfish Story. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with it, but it's a story of a boy walking along the beach, and he's picking up starfish that had beached, and he's throwing them back into the ocean. And, you know, an older gentleman comes up and says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm saving the starfish." And the older gentleman said, "Well, you can't save them all. You know, you're not going to make a difference." And the little boy said, you know, as he threw another starfish in, he said, "I make a difference for that one." So I just suggest that you think about that. If you can make a difference for one person, you never know, that one person can make a difference for someone else. So don't always think it has to be big. You know, you can just start with something small, or start with one person that you know you can help, and you just never know how far reaching that can be. The other advice I have for female colleagues who are feeling overwhelmed, my heart has gone out to working moms during this COVID time, where they're at home with their kids, they're juggling being teachers and moms and everything else all at once, and it's hard. So the one thing I can say that hopefully will help you is just to remind you that you have to take care of yourself, and it's not being selfish if you need self-time. It's worth it for you to figure out what you can do for your own self-care, for your own mental health, and don't allow that mommy guilt to get in the way. You have to replenish. You have to find, you know, your way of stepping out of the chaos that is, and create some space and peace for yourself. So if you need to get permission, then I'm giving you permission. You have permission to be what others would call selfish, but I'm gonna call it self-care, so that you can you know, build that resilience and get through this, which hopefully will be in the near future. So.
Thank you. Anyone else like to answer that question on the panel? Okay. So my next question is, how much of your success was due to adapting to a dominant culture versus the culture accepting you and your true self? So I know many of you have spoken about going into spaces that maybe were not initially you felt were meant for you. And so there's always this idea that I'm thinking of, especially of younger women who are going into a culture that they don't know. And it's like, are you assimilating to that culture, or are you trying to, you know, be your true self and have that culture change? And how have you experienced that?
You know, it's interesting, and I'm thinking here again about the experience of some of my other panelists today certainly sounded like those situations required a lot of adaptation. Again, maybe because I'm in higher ed, I've been fortunate that my path involved more of the culture accepting me and my true self. But having said that, there was a lot of intentionality around that. And I can remember so I was faculty for a while, then I was a lower level administrator. When I became provost, that's a VP level job that's on the president's cabinet. And I can remember my second week on the job, and I have grown up here at Westchester, so these folks all know me and I know them. I got the job as an internal candidate. But I can remember literally the second week in my role here now, in the senior role, walking into my office, and in my little conference table, there were two vice presidents sitting in my office. And they weren't on my calendar, and they had a whole bunch of questions, and it happened to be around finance and budget. And I happened to be very good at that. So I, answered them and all, but I mean, it was clearly an ambush. And I have an assistant that's outside in a foyer, that is sort of in this common area. And I went through the meeting and, did all of that. And as they got up to leave, I told both of them that the next time that they wanted to meet with me, they needed to make an appointment. And when they arrived for that appointment, they needed to wait in the foyer. And I also reminded them that I am a peer, and that they needed to respect that position. And, I say that, and of course, as I say that, my heart's pounding and whatever, but they were, sort of shocked and taken aback, and it never happened again. So there are moments, right? Even there's scary moments sometimes, standing up for yourself, but it's critical that respect, just simple respect, right? I expect, I'll accept nothing less, and I expect nothing more. And you give that back to other people around you. So I think changing the culture, there's sort of dramatic moments like that. And then there are less dramatic. The other piece for me that was a really big piece was a culture of team. When I first became provost, we had a group of deans, and it was very much, the mentality was sort of the way a university is organized, right? There's colleges and departments, right? And sort of different groupings. And it was sort of every college for themselves. It was a lot of backroom deals and all kinds of stuff. And I didn't want that as a leader. And so the team, it started just with me and one other person, but over the course of 3 years, that entire group of deans has been replaced. Everybody who gets on board now fully is committed to being a team. We function absolutely in a very open and transparent way. And as I said early on about that sort of forthrightness and honesty, that is a quality that I want in the whole team. And so it's a big culture change, and that took time. That was more incremental. But I think it's possible now. It is possible now, especially depending your environment, to change the culture and not just have to feel like you've got to just be in that adapting mode. So,
Dr. Bernotsky, there's a question in the chat. Someone asked, would you have been able to respectfully turn them away and told them to make an appointment instead of speaking with them right then and there? Would you have felt uncomfortable? And was there a way to do that without jeopardizing your position?
You know, it's a great question. I will say I was so shocked that they were there. It sort of took me a moment. And as I sat there and realized what it was about, I thought, you know what, I can just slice and dice them right here in this meeting, which to me was more important in that moment for them to understand that this ambush didn't faze me in the slightest in terms of not being prepared, because I knew all the numbers and I knew the stuff, just because it's what I did. So I don't know. I could have, I guess, had I thought about it, and I ended up doing that at the end just because I was so taken aback. No one's ever done that to me, and no one's ever done it since. But it's a good question. And let me just say this: I would not have jeopardized the one piece I really should make clear. I happen to have a fabulous president who I know would have my back. He is married to a labor attorney who is a wonderful feminist in her own right. So I certainly had courage to do it because I know he would have absolutely backed me up, even if I had said, respectfully or disrespectfully, take a hike.
Thank you. My last question, as your careers advanced and developed, how did your efforts to help other women shift, if at all?
I can go with this one. Oh, sorry, Roberta.
We'll do Patty and then Roberta.
I continue to mentor and coach women because that's the right thing to do. But as I've become more financially secure, I'm in a position to support more women through community service and nonprofit organizations that help women and families, like the Fund for Women and Pathways PA. And I have a pretty loud voice these days because, when you feel pretty comfortable in life, you can be louder. So I move other women to actions that make a difference for others. And hopefully some of that happened this morning. One of the things that I was going to cover earlier was that, it's not just mentors and mentoring, but it's having thought partners and collaborators. And I have several on this call today that are willing to sacrifice their time, Donna Brennan and Ann Dunn and Kate Sennett, who's actively involved in the fund, who we have a group and we have Zoom calls. And I think that's very important in your career. I didn't learn it until much later. And to actually formalize it, give it a name, have your happy hours, have your dinners, and have time to spend with people. So that was a shift I made. It wasn't just people that I was mentoring and coaching. And by the way, I do that for life with them because you want to stick around long enough to experience their success and feel like you're part of it. But I mentioned earlier too that one other thing that I've done and I'll just spend a minute on is that with this growth and the financial security, I was able to set up a scholarship fund for young women that go to my alma mater, Ohio State University, and are focused on journalism, and which is what I graduated in, and investigative reporting. And these ladies are brilliant. There's been 6 so far, and they've gone on to work for NPR, the New York Times, and even the Peace Corps. And I know that getting their strong start that they did in college and not have to worry about the finances was a very important part of that. And 2 investigative reporting things. So you talk about paying forward and having other people make a difference that you've impacted. One did an investigative report, and you'll appreciate this, Lorraine, on the university. The paper there is totally independent. It's not funded by the university, so there's no censorship. She did an investigative report on the inequities of pay and tenureship for female professors and won all kinds of awards for it. Then another one did an investigative report on the challenges young women who are in college face that have children. And, they are they are going above and beyond what I thought would be possible based on what I was able to do for them. And I realized early on that without education, I could have ended up, you know, an unwed mother, you know, not having any benefits, in minimum wage job, you know, all of that could have happened to me. But when you have organizations like the fund to support and encourage young women and people like on this panel and the ones we heard earlier that are always paying forward by making a difference with others, we are changing things. It's, you know, for me, it seems slow, and I'm sure people feel that way as well. But I welcome the opportunity now to help those that are less privileged, because I'm privileged. I'm white. I'm not an immigrant. I'm now educated. I'm financially secure. I have healthcare benefits that are great, probably better now than ever before. And with privilege comes responsibility. And that's what I think we're all about. We can make a difference. And that's the legacy that I want.
Thank you, Roberta.
So was the question about legacy or about melting into a culture?
The question was, as your career developed and advanced, how did your efforts to help women shift, if at all? And it could be your legacy also, however you would like to answer.
So one thing I wanted to say earlier, actually, because we were talking about, you know, bringing your authentic self and how do you adapt to a culture? Does the culture adapt to you? I wanted to say that when you start out, you're going to have to adapt. So just face it. When you come out of college, when you come out of law school, when you come out of business school, when you come out of nursing school, whatever you're coming out of, and you have your first job, you are not going to walk into any place other than your parents' business and say, this is who I am, now adjust to it. So that's just to keep in mind. You go in and, you know, maybe the first 6 months you sort of figure things out, and then you ease into, this is who I am, this is how I behave, this is how I need to interact with people. But day one, right out of school, you're not going to change the culture by yourself. And I will say that the longer you're at it and you're doing well at it, the stronger you feel and the braver you are. You know, I was brave enough to tell people either do it my way or the highway. I'll give the work to somebody else because, yeah, I was older and I was secure. I wouldn't have done that when I was 25 and just passing the bar. So, you know, just keep in mind that some of this you have to mature, you know, you have to mature into. How have I changed? I think the way that I've changed, and I will say, and I think we've said it before, that mentors come in all shapes and sizes. And because when I came through, my mentors were white males, two of whom I'm still very, very close to. The one who made me general counsel over all the white guys at the firm is still very, very close to me. And the person who brought me into Reed Smith and put me up for partner 18 months after I got there is still a very, very close friend as well. So we have to look for our partners wherever they are. I don't know that I have a legacy. I mean, I think that there are, as I said before, women that I've been mentoring a long time that I'm still mentoring. And I hope that they will be my legacy. I mentioned one is now going to be helping run the Obama Foundation. Another is at LinkedIn. Another is currently in Puerto Rico working with her law firm, and you know, one's at the Federal Reserve. So they're just sort of all over the place. So I think that if I have any legacy at all, it'll be that, number one, I will have demonstrated both in-house and in a firm that Black women can be very effective, they're very smart, and can generate one heck of a lot of business. Despite what the statistics may say, we can do that. I've done it, and I hope that, you know, that'll show people coming after me, people who are still at the firm, that can be done. And the second thing is, I hope it'll be that I really do care, that if I become your mentor, then you're mentoring me as well. And it's a lifelong commitment, that it shouldn't be transactional. You can sponsor people, and that can be more transactional because you kind of have to be in the workplace with them to be a sponsor. But to be a mentor, I think, can be a lifetime commitment, and that's what it is for me. Wow,
thank you so much to all of you. Your candor, your stories, your vulnerability, your willingness to be bold, to speak up on behalf of not just yourself, but the women that surrounded you, who looked up to you and needed you to be that voice for them. I thank you on behalf of them for maybe all the thank yous you didn't get along the way, the recognition that maybe you didn't get along the way. I thank you personally for that, and just your willingness to share these important stories to people who are trying to be in your positions along their way or are already there. So before we close out, there is a few minutes for questions. So if folks have questions or want to put in the chat, we'll be happy to see. Oh, we have one here. How do you recommend building respect from colleagues upon first entering a company or industry without a lot of experience or right out of college? Some of our panelists want to take that question.
So I would say just focus on being excellent in everything that you're doing. I think especially when it's your first job and you're going in, you need to build a reputation of being excellent at whatever it is that you're doing, and to have just a spirit of excellence. And I think that's a good foundation to then build off of as your tenure grows.
I would add.
I'm sorry, Charmaine. I thought you were.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
Just adding to that, and it's interesting, Roberta made a point just a few moments ago, right, about when you're first there and sort of adapting, et cetera. And that's important. And I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more with Charmaine about excellence. But I guess for what it's worth, and maybe this gets back to the thing about just knowing who you are authentically, there will be moments even in the first 6 months or so, or even that first year, where there will be people who absolutely are going to sort out if they have to respect you or not. So even if it's not a dramatic revolution or throwing people out of your office, or I would still say, and I'm even thinking back to some of my very first weeks here at Rochester, when I had to stand up for myself. Chris, our president, used to call my department 12 angry men. And that's what they were. I mean, it was political science, very male dominated. And I can remember even in those first few weeks having to really push back hard. My dad was in the Navy and said something I remember him saying, Laurie, sometimes with guys, you just have to punch them right in the nose, like figuratively. And so I guess for what it's worth, I would still say that there's moments, right? And in your own way, and don't get fired, but you might just have to also figure out ways to stand up for yourself, draw some boundaries in order to get that respect.
The one thing that I would add to it is relationship building is very important. And people don't like you necessarily until they know you. Now, they still may not like you after they know you, but at least make the attempt. I would say that relationship building has been key to my success throughout. It's hard to disagree with somebody you really, really like. So make them like you.
Awesome advice from our panelists. Michelle, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Tiffany, and thank you all. It has really just been an honor to lift up your voices and lift up your experiences throughout the morning. Everyone was so excellent, and I know we will have a lot to think about and chew on as we move forward.